Welcome to Animate Earth. We're here tonight with Jasper Lee, and we are going to be talking about the common wild tongue, Jasper, which we're all really excited about. And just to say a little bit about Animate Earth, for those of you who are joining us for the first time. We are a collection of people, which now includes all you, that are really interested in how we can remember and recover and restore our relationship with place and with the natural world, really remembering back to what our ancestors may have brought to that relationship. And obviously all of our ancestors several hundreds of years ago would have had a very different relationship with the natural world than we have today. So we're really delighted to bring Jasper in this evening, who is from the Romani Gypsy tradition of the British Isles. So in Britain, it's not that usual for us to have elders that have ancestral traditions that go way back to those times when we would have had an animistic worldview. So we're super excited tonight to have Jasper speak with us. And before we do, I'm going to ask him to just open with a prayer, but just also to say that we'll run it as a conversation. So I will ask Jasper some questions. And then about 40 minutes in, we'll ask if anybody else has questions that they would like to ask, and we'll try and cover as many of those as possible. We will have the chat on, so if you want to use that, you're welcome. Whether we spot your questions or not is always a difficult one, depending on how fast they go, but we'll try and cover as many of those as well as possible. So Jasper, may I ask you to say our intentional prayer for this evening?
Okay, thanks, Rachel. First of all, it's a great honour as a Romani chovihano to be here doing this. And before I started this tonight, I started to think how phenomenal it is to have people coming together and asking questions like this. So that led me to the spirit of destiny. So what I'd like to do with this session is ask the spirit of destiny to be with us all, to guide us, guard us, keep us, help us to find the path we need to find, and hopefully to find it through this session we are conducting tonight. If the spirit of destiny can enter your life, then that will be something that's very special. So this is what I ask for, the spirit of destiny to grace our shores and to bring us what we need so that afterwards we travel on the true road that we're meant to be on, the true ancient road. And I'd like to, as a chovihano, bless that road so that we all find exactly what we need to find. Thank you to the ancestors for helping with this message. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Jasper. And for those who don't know, chovihano is the Romani Gypsy word for medicine man in that tradition. So brilliant, that kind of brings me to the first question then, really, Jasper. Could you tell us a little bit about your ancestors then, and how they would have related to the natural world, which I guess is very different from the way we do pretty much, at least in this country today? You could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, the ancestors in my family were almost like friends. They weren't these far away beings that we honored them, we respected them, but there was something about them traveling along with us, and they traveled along with us through the natural world. And when I say the natural world, I'm talking about not just the physical trees and the physical water that we see, like in streams and seas and or any water at all, lakes. The ancestors were present in our lives in a much more special way, I suppose. We talked about them as if they just live next door. I mean, that may sound strange, but that's how we talked to them. It didn't mean to say we didn't respect them, but we talked about them like that. And I was brought up with this. I was brought up with the idea of the Romani culture being almost like an everyday thing. So that was why it was a little odd when I related to other people who were non-Romani and realized that they were not actually thinking in the same way as I did. Now, it's good to point out also that there's a lot of humor in the Romani culture. So when we related to ancestors, there was a lot of humor involved as well. There was a lot of mimicking. Romanis are good at mimicking. So we thought, well, we must have got that from the ancestors. There was a lot of profound thinking, and we thought, well, we must have got that from the ancestors. Everything you ever thought you got from the ancestors. And it was the natural world that connected us. Now, when I say the natural world, people probably will be surprised maybe when I talk about the values of the natural world, because it's not just, as I say, a physical tree that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the values that that tree may give off to us. And the values of the tree is, well, a tree is steadfast. A tree cannot run. My great-grandfather always used to say that a tree can't run. A tree has to stand his or her ground and face whatever comes. And that gives you enormous strength. So if you can take that strength from the tree, I mean, a tree is chopped down. A tree can't do anything about it. If a tree is sitting there and somebody comes along with a chainsaw or an axe, then that's the end. So that very value, that strength, we used to feel was passed on to us. And it was the natural world that gave us these wonderful values. And we traveled on with those, and they were part of my upbringing. They were, as I often say, learning about the values and learning about the finer aspects of my culture was like doing the washing up. And that's not belittling it at all. That is saying how normal it was in everyday life. So therefore, when I traveled out into the world and I realized that people didn't think like this, I thought, that's a bit different, because we are very earthy people. We are very down-to-earth people. If you want to know what a real Romani Gypsy is like, they're usually very down-to-earth, very earthy, very practical in a lot of ways. So when they are spiritual, they bring that spirituality into the practical and make it so that it's part of everyday life. It's all part of everyday life. And that is something that I think we really need to focus on today. We need more of that rather than less.
You talk, Jasper, about this idea of law then, and I'd be interested to hear what the Romani traditions, so by law I mean the kind of instructions within nature, which you've touched on a bit there with the tree. If you can give us, I know that you have a particular spirit. In fact, it seems to me that you have a spirit for almost everything in the world, which is what we mean by an animate world. So could you talk a little bit more about the spirit of the law and the instructions that we find within the natural world that we really struggle to read, most of us today?
I think that's a very sort of interesting question, but it's also something the answer is very detailed, because when you're talking about something called Makaraban, which is a code of law, you're talking about something that's sort of inbuilt, if you like. It's built inside us. And if we're talking about instructions, then well, let's sort of take it back to the really ancient people. If you go back to the really ancient people, then they would have known that automatically. They wouldn't have to learn it. Unfortunately, we have to relearn. And to relearn, we have to unlearn. That sounds a bit odd, but there are ways we can do this. It takes a while to unlearn, but we've got to sort of I suppose, unravel all the stuff that we've learned about what we think life is about. And I found that most of the time, this isn't actually quite accurate, because most of what we learn is gleaned from New Age spiritual teachers, from certain books, from this, from that. And we have such a lot of information. It's not even knowledge sometimes, it's more information, because we live in a world of information with technology the way we have it. It's all about information. So if we're talking about those, well, values again, I suppose if we're talking about the values, then we have to work out how we can work back to what I call primary organic thinking. We have to work back to something that is organic within us. I often say we're always eating organic food, we have organic clothes, we have eco this and that, and we're not organic. I mean, it sounds weird to say that, but we're not. We don't know how to practice organic thinking, if you like. So it is very detailed. And this law of mycharibin, it's something that the birds practice. It's something that all the wild animals practice. It's something that is practiced in the wild all the time. And when we were wild, way back, thousands and thousands of years ago, I'm not talking about just a few hundred years ago, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, it was automatic in us. Now, somehow, slowly, very slowly, that changed. As time went on, those, as you say, instructions got mixed up with instructions according to civilized living, according to the way we have been colonized all over the world, according to all sorts of things that are absolutely nothing to do with primary organic thinking or to do with the way we used to be. So it's a very, very, I suppose it seems like a complex thing to think about, but it's not complex, because most of what we need is just to be simple. Most of what we need is just to think as we are, who we are, what we are, and just think that I want to know how I can tap into these instructions, this law of mycharibin, this code of law, and I want to know how I can do that. One of the best ways is to listen to the birds singing, is to take a walk in a wood and just think simply. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, the spirit of destiny will pop into your mind and will probably give you some sort of path that you can tread that's going to lead you back to these instructions. So tapping into the values is vital. If you tap into the values of what you find within nature, let's say briefly, let's say courage. It takes courage for a leaf to fall. It takes strength for a tree to stand his or her ground. It takes humility for a wood to flourish. It takes humility for us as well to relate to that wood that's flourishing. There are all kinds of values that I can't go into them all at the moment because it takes a long time. But if you think of the values that are there within the natural world, then you will tap into what the law of mycharibin is trying to teach us. The law of mycharibin goes across all the animals and birds and humans, or it used to be with humans. And we can then learn to speak that wonderful language of the values that exist in the natural world. So.
Well, I could ask you a million questions about that. So as you finished there with the kind of, it cuts across everything except humans. We wanted really, again, to talk about this common tongue that you refer to, the common wild tongue, and this idea that everything in the natural world kind of communicates together, that it's humans that don't anymore because we've come up with our own language. Can you say a bit more about that? I've always felt that that must be the case, that actually everything's in a conversation that I'm not, and I'm sure most of us feel the same. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, well, the common wild tongue, we might say, how do we find it? But we could say, how do we lose it? I think really that's the sort of thing we're having to address today, because if we look back at the ancient wild people, I'm talking about prehistoric people who go way, way back, say, let's say 2,000 or 3,000 years. I'm not talking about a few hundred years, 2,000 or 3,000 years, when we actually used a language that could travel across from many different species. And I don't know how we lost it. I mean, I think we need to ask how we lost it, but I think just asking that very question is useful, because we can't find something until we find how it was lost, if you know what I mean. Don't want to get too complex for that. But the language itself, the common wild tongue language, is something that we still have inside us. We still have it there. It is still there if we only care to look. But it's the way we look. There's a lot that's talked today about being intuitive. There's a lot to talk of people talking about instinct. There's a lot that goes on where we're trying to reach that something that we had thousands of years ago. And sometimes we miss the mark. And I think that's usually to do with not looking where we should be looking. We sort of miss that spot. We miss that place where we can access it. A lot of it, of course, is to do with the fact that we're surrounded by problems. We have to live everyday life meeting problems. A lot of us are suffering from trauma. A lot of us have family relationship problems. We have friend relationship problems. We have work relationship problems. We have all these kind of problems that fill up our lives. So it doesn't give us a lot of opportunity for sort of parting the waves, if you like, of all that and finding what's left when you take that all away. But that's what we've got to find. We have to find a kind of the only way I can think of saying it is a nothingness. Now that I don't want that to sound as if nothing is there, as if there's nothing at all, no life or anything. But what I'm trying to say is parting everything so that we've got something that is nothing. I'm not talking about an absence of something. I'm talking about, I suppose some people will call it presence. You know, there could be something like that, the way you could describe it. But if we go to that point, now that is a special point in my culture that relates to the winter solstice, because at winter solstice, as you know, it's the end of a cycle and beginning of a cycle. And between the end and the beginning, there is nothingness, because there's that stillness, there's that place where nothing is happening. Now, if we can try to visualize that sometimes, and we part the waves of all our personal problems, we've all got personal problems, but I think it helps to go to that space, that place, that idea of nothingness, so that we can get between all this stuff. And there we can find how to speak the common wild tongue. It may sound strange, but what it will do is it will unite us with the way the wild birds are, with the way the wild animals are, because they haven't got the trauma that we've got. They've got problems, yes, but they have a different mindset. They have a way of thinking that parts that out of the way, because they've got a short attention span, they've got short memory, and they don't harbour or hoard, if you like, all the things that we have been conditioned to hoard, I suppose, or harbour. So if you can only find this place, and I will help you do that at the end of this session, because I will take us away into wherever we're going with an idea of that. And hopefully that will help you to understand what the common wild tongue is about, because it's a message, it's a sound, it's a song. It's not just speaking words. I mean, we use too many words. It's so many words we use, and we have to be so detailed, as I'm having to do now. I'm having to try to find words to explain what I'm trying to say. But a sound, a call, the birds call, the animals call, it's all those things. And the only way we're going to find that is to part all that stuff away from ourselves and enter that space and try, if we can, to reunite with that part in ourselves. It takes a while, but I will say it can be done.
Is it something that you kind of are aware of? Do you hold it kind of simultaneously in your life? Do you have methods of getting there? And obviously we'll practice one at the end, but how does that work for you?
Yes, I find it helps when I'm anxious. I find that if I enter that, I suppose it's another worldly space, I suppose we could call it that, but I find that if I'm having trouble or problems with something, then I try to access that place, then it does help, because what actually happens is you start to think, look, all this personal stuff, it doesn't matter. It's only you here at this time with this personal stuff that makes the stuff personal stuff. And other people have got personal stuff, and your personal stuff isn't their personal stuff. So if you can part the ways and see that your personal stuff is, well, see yourself like an actor on the stage. I've done a lot of theatre. I've been involved with that a lot. And if you see that what you're doing is a mere story, it's narrative, it's something that is going to cloud your mind and dominate it and get it to be in the way it doesn't always want to be. So if you can see it like that, then it does help. But that's how I see it. I see as soon as a problem gets a little bit overboard and it starts to play on my mind, and I think, okay, stop. I use music to help me to get into that, because I have to work through certain frames of mind to get to that sort of place. But if I can do that, then yes, it does help enormously to find that ancient place, if you like, where I can just reconnect with ancestors, reconnect with what is, reconnect with something that's far more relevant than what I've been going through with all the problems and all the mess that's crowding in, etc. Yeah. Learn to laugh as well. I think that's another good one. Learn to laugh at everything.
Can you give us some idea then? So Jasper has written 2 fantastic books, which I didn't mention at the beginning. One I have here, Coming Home to the Trees. The other is, oh, remind me of the title of it, Jasper.
We Borrow the Earth.
We Borrow
the Earth.
Also, people, We Borrow the Earth has got much more about your traditional culture, which is fascinating. But I wonder if you could say a little bit about that I'm guessing a lot of people won't have read that, but just a little bit about that and how you come to be kind of a medicine man in that tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's an interesting story. Briefly, my great-grandfather passed on these ways down through the line, and my grandmother sort of pointed at me and said, you've got abilities, so you're the one who could actually do this. And I exhibited some strange behavior when I was a teenager. So my grandmother said, yes, you know, that this might be something that you could carry on in your life. And so anyway, cut a long story short, it went on from there. My great-grandfather, I observed him, and I observed Puro, who's an ancient ancestor of mine, coming through him and saying some amazing things. And I was spellbound with this when I was little. I was absolutely spellbound. And now today, Puro visits me as a medicine man and comes through me because his role is to help medicine men. Now, I must say something about a medicine man. You're probably accustomed to the idea of a medicine man being more associated with tribal folk like Native Americans, Africans, different ancient cultures. But in the Romani tradition, the medicine man is much more social. He deals with the social elements of life. And that's why you'll hear me talking about people's problems and people's trauma and all that sort of thing. We do have contact with the other world. We do communicate with the other world to get answers as a typical shaman would, I suppose, but I don't think of myself as a shaman. What I think of myself as is somebody who can interact with the other world so that I can help people find where they need to go in life and find what they have to do with their lives so that they can make the best of their lives. I don't have any particular rituals except for blessings and except for reuniting people with where they need to be, for protection, for that sort of thing. It's a little bit complex to explain, but I suppose one way to talk about it is it's more in line with the Eastern way of thinking, in the sense that there are a lot of, which I discovered, a lot of parallels with Tibetan Buddhism, with cultures and disciplines that come from the East. So, and of course, the Romani people have origins in India and in what used to be ancient Persia. So there are a lot of parallels there with the cultures there. I found that out because when I was writing my first book, We Borrow the Earth, I looked quite a lot at the language and the way the language traveled from India right through along the Middle East and up into Europe until it ended in the British Isles. And a lot of the words we have are Sanskrit based. So, and that's what I go into in We Borrow the Earth. I talk about this quite a bit because I was absolutely fascinated reading about the journey the language took. And so we took on a lot of the languages on that route from India to Britain, which is quite fascinating and quite interesting to read about, to see where the words come from. So the traditions are still the same, mostly still the same as they were right back when the Romanists first started their journey from India to Britain. Now, when that was is a big question. We don't actually know. There are various theories, and I go into that in the book as well. But those traditions have been preserved, I feel, because the Romani people lived outside of society. They weren't part of what they said, no, we're not taking part in society. So when all the cultures were being colonized, like the Native Americans, that happened in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Romani people were still living in the woods here in Britain in a tribal way, exactly as they would have done for many hundreds of years. And the authorities weren't taking much notice of them because they were so busy going and colonizing everybody else. So I think it's really a wonderful thing that the Romans were able to preserve what they did and preserve their way of life from the authorities. And that's how I can sit here talking about this today, because it's been preserved. And I'm grateful to all those Romans before my time, before me, who passed that on. So when Jack Lee, my great-grandfather, passed it on, he's done a good thing, because I'm able to sit here and talk like this now, which I wouldn't have been able to do if we'd been absorbed into society's ways. So
brilliant, thank you, Jasper. And as the kind of lineage holder in our time, then, as kind of a holder of an earth-based tradition, what do you see your work then, given the situation, given the kind of degradation really of our relationship with the natural world as it stands at the moment. Do you see that there's a way for some of this ancient kind of relationship to come back? You know, what do you feel your work is on that front?
Yeah, I would hope that it would come back. I suppose, I mean, for a long while, I withdrew from my work and I withdrew from everyone. And the reason for that was that I got very disillusioned. I was working quite well for a while, and then people started to drop away. This is pre-COVID. And when they did, I thought, there's no room for me. There's no room for me in this world, because the world was on a downward trajectory, shall we say, and I just saw no room for me. But then I suddenly thought, and this is courtesy of my ancestors, what the hell? I've really got to say it as it is, because I wasn't saying it as it was before, not quite as much as I am now, but now I really feel that I need to talk about my traditions in a realistic way, but also I need to help people to understand that they have an ancestry as well as me. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I belong to the Romani race, I have an ancestry, it's a shame you haven't got one. That's not what it's about. We all have an ancestry. I always say, if you prick your finger and draw blood, you will have the blood of ancestors going back 4, 5, 10,000 years. They are there. That blood is there. And if you couldn't do that, then you wouldn't have ancestors, and you wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for them. So therefore, part of my work, a big part of my work, because I'm a social medicine man, if you like, a big part of my work is to pass on my traditions to help people, but not only that, to help people know that they also belong. We all need to belong. And we are all Indo-European. We all come from, you know, that ancestry, if you like, in one fashion or another. And I think this is important, really. We've really got to think about this more deeply, because when you think what the West has done, I mean, I'm the last remaining Romani chovihano in the West, as far as I know. But when you think of what the West has done, how it's gone out and colonized so many tribal folk, and it's ruined all sorts of cultures, you know, cultural appropriation goes through the roof, you know, and it does today still. And I'm still talking about this. I'm still saying to people, be mindful of what you're doing. Don't go and steal other people's cultures. You have your own. We have our own. The Indo-European world can provide something for us all. And that's what we've got to gain access to. So when you ask about my work, what does it involve? I think it involves my traditions, but my traditions tell me that other people are worthy of finding their ancestry, so that maybe we can create something together that realigns us with what we all have. Because for goodness sake, we all need to belong. We all deserve that. So we don't need to go galloping off to find cultures from other climes. We can find it ourselves. So socially, that's my role, I think, and traditionally.
Fantastic, Jasper. And if anybody has a question for Jasper, it'd be brilliant if you could raise your hands, electronic hands, on the reactions button. And I have one last question, which I will. Well, I've got many questions, but I'll bring in tonight if I can remember it. Ancestry. I've completely forgot my question. If anybody else has one, and brilliant, Tilly, I'll come back to mine.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question, and thank you, Jasper, for the generosity of your time. And I was particularly touched by what you just said there, that sort of kindness to those of us who maybe have become disconnected from our ancestry and lineage, and the kindness to show the encouragement for us to find that again, rather than rail against us, our ancestors for what they may have done. So thank you. And I have dipped a little bit into your book, We Borrowed the Earth, and I particularly was struck by the creation story that you shared a little of, but also just the role of story itself in your tradition, the Roman tradition, and in your ways as a medicine man. And I'd love you to say a bit more about that, if possible. What I'd really like to know is, have you got a story that's active for you at the moment that you might think is you'd like to share? Thanks.
Yes, well, I suppose the story of the Ran. This is what we call a Ran. I'm going to use this at the end of the session. This has travelled with me a long way, all the way through. My great-grandfather used to use, not this, but he used something like this. And I think the story of this would be that it would want to tell its own story, that it would say, don't misuse me. Don't, I don't want everyone to go rushing off as people do today and say, right, Jasper has a Ran, Jasper has a wand, Jasper has something with bells on, I better go and make one. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, when we're talking about a medicine man using this and this connecting with him and him connecting with this, we're talking about something that's unique. We're talking about something that's unusual. Something I am really opposed to is the fact that when people go to shamanic courses, there are many shamanic courses these days, and everybody does it so that they can become a shaman. Now, I know that my great-grandfather would have laughed his socks off at this. He would have said, why do you have 20 people in a group and they are all shamans? That is absolutely ludicrous. We don't need to do that. That's why I don't call myself a shaman, because I really feel we've just gone overboard with this. We've got to sort of get real. We've got to come back down to earth. So if I'm talking about a story, yes, I think that the story of this is saying, don't abuse me. Don't abuse me. I've been abused all through time, and I'm here to help. I'm here as an aid. I'm here to give protection. And I'm here to be unique. This is unique. And if we can put our egos down, I think that's something we've all got to do. We've all got to put our egos down and say, look, we're okay. We're normal. We're not particularly special, but there's a great value in being normal. There's a great value in saying, I'm a normal person, and I'm just trying my best to belong. And so I think this is what I use this for, is to help people to feel that they belong and that they don't have to have any grandiose ideas about anything where this is concerned. It's just a simple stick out of the garden I had in Sussex, and it's got the bells on and it's got the red wall, and it's very simple. It's not anything that's dramatic or pompous. I'm not pompous for having this. I'm not anything special. I'm just an ordinary chovihano waving the bells. So
thank you, Jasper. Thank you, Tilly, for that question, for rescuing me for a moment there. We have another question from Ivy. We can't hear you. Are you unmuted?
Put the sound up.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Ivy.
Hey. Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Yeah, I don't mean to be pedantic or anything, but I was wondering, when you were saying that we're all Indo-European, I was wondering what you mean by that, as in like, because when I think of Indo-European, I think of a particular kind of group of people, but I don't really know a lot. I don't know exactly what it means, or whether, yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think I'm using that term very broadly because if I'm trying to say people of European extraction or people who are of, well, let's just say the Middle East and India, where my folks came from, it's the language. We've got the Indo-European language. That is the thing that binds us all. And that goes a long, long way back. So it's not particularly that we're an actual group of people per se. It's not like that, but it's the only term I can find to use to talk about the language that developed. Because if you look back at a lot of the language, when I was researching and I found that the Sanskrit language, if you go back and look at all the language, you find that it's all got a similar root, which is Indo-European. There's an Indo-European sound before you get the word. So when etymologists trace it back, you've got this sound, and that's the common wild tongue, if anything is. You've got this sound that could have been a common sound that was possibly used all across the Indo-European world, all across the Middle East, all across Europe. I don't know, but it's very broad. But that's what I mean when I say it. There's no other way to describe it. So I'm talking about Westerners, really, I suppose. And there's something that ties us together. And it is actually this. It's the fact that we all share something that we've lost, and it's gone. We've lost it, but we can rekindle that and bring it back and hopefully start a revolution. And bring it back. I hope that answers your question a little.
I think so, yeah. Is it, do you say, sorry but when do you talk about Indo-Europeans in particular as being like a group who have forgotten in general, as compared to other parts of the world? Yeah,
certainly. Yeah, well, we've lost it because just take Britain for example. We were colonized way back in the Neolithic era, which is 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. We were colonized in exactly the same way as the Native Americans have been, but it's so long ago we've all forgotten it. Like you say, we have forgotten everything. And the wild people here lost their wildness, lost everything that they had that was wild a long time ago. So it has been forgotten, but it's still there. I believe it's still there. We need to rekindle that animistic sense. We need to rekindle that spiritual sense, if you like, that wild sense. We need to rediscover that. And it's still there. And that's what I think it's quite exciting to think that we all share that. We all have a common bond like that. So, yeah, good.
Thank you. All right, thank you. I get that.
Yes, okay.
So, Jasper, would you say that this is the revolution, then rekindling that animistic worldview? Could you say a bit more about that? And also, I've remembered the question from earlier.
Oh,
actually, sorry, apologies to everybody. Don't let me lose it again. Okay, so when we find our own ancestry, then, so let's hold the revolution thing in parallel. When we find our own ancestry, then I guess for a lot of us, there is tradition that we're not going to be able to find, that's common.
Yeah.
Obviously, the cultural misappropriation thing is a huge issue here. What do you feel is appropriate to share from your tradition then, given that certainly within the British Isles, that's perhaps one of the traditions that we do still have? Yeah.
I see what you're saying. I think that's the relevance of my existence, I was going to say, of what I'm doing. That's the relevance, because I hail from, I have a lineage, and I hail from people who have passed it on orally. I mean, none of this was ever written down until I started writing it down and got into trouble with my family at first. But I think that's what we have to look at, that I'm presenting something that is authentic. So not that we all have to go around doing exactly what I do, but what we can do is tap into something that maybe goes across many cultures, in the sense, and one of the things we can use is the values, you see. Now, where you're talking about cultural appropriation, we should start to develop the sense, are we stealing something? Are we into tribal theft? Are we doing something that isn't appropriate? We will know when we're doing it. People telephone me and say, is this being culturally inappropriate because I'm, you know, they ask me, and I said, well, if you develop that sense inside, then you won't be, you'll know whether you're doing that or not. But I think there are various things that we can do where we can find that sense of belonging. We can practice little rituals that maybe I could help with. We can do things that are not actually taking something from somewhere else, but also, moreover, that we're not just simply making up just because we think that's what we should do. It is an interesting question, and this is an exploration that we're on, because we've got to do something. You mentioned earlier about, you know, the world falling down, and or the world become, you know, taking a turn for the worse. It is. So we've got to do something. But I feel that out of this, it's not just what I say, it's what we can all do together, that we can all come together and provide something that taps into those values that the natural world has given us, and that reconnects with those. And then we go on from there. And then it's going to be an exploration. But I think that's what we have to start with.
Fantastic, Jasper. And I feel that values is something that we love to talk with you more about in really great depth. And I'm hoping that you will come back to do that. So yeah, it feels like we can't even begin on that here any more than we have done. So, but that's wonderful. Julia, you have a question.
It's not a question, actually. Jasper knows me.
Right.
Yeah. All I was going to say to that, I think, Rachel, you asked the question there about how do we connect back with our ancestors? And I'm a herbalist and a forager, and I know when I'm walking out with plants, I mean, you know, I know my patch and I know all the plants in that area, and I'm picking things. And all right, my family came from further away than where I live now, but they're the same plants because I'm in the same country. And I know as I pick hawthorn at the minute, or elderflowers coming in now where I am, that I'm connecting, doing what my ancestors did, if you see what I mean. And that, for me, is my way of connecting in. So I think it depends what you do in your life, but that is certainly being outside. Our ancestors spent a lot more time outside. They had, even if they had houses, tiny little houses, didn't they? So, you know, my grandma, she got brought up 12 of them in a 2-bedroom house. I don't know how they did that, you know. So they spent a lot of time outdoors. They had to go and collect their own water. They didn't have gas and electric, you know. So they spent that time outside, and they knew the seasons. And like now I'm like, oh God, everything's moving so fast, as it does at this point in the year. I can't pick fast enough, you know. So I just wanted to say, you know, that's one way of connecting back, because you know your ancestors somewhere back, they had to go and pick some stuff. They had to eat, and they weren't growing it all. So, and they knew all those plants, you know. So yeah, that was it was a comment, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Lovely to see you. Any more questions? Jasper, how long do you need? We have about 10 minutes left from now. Shall we move into your practice?
We can do if you think we could.
I think that would be wonderful.
Good. Okay. Right. Shall I go ahead then?
Please. Brilliant.
Okay. Okay. So, well, considering what we've covered, I'd like to take that into a little bit of I suppose it's a mini meditation so that we can move on with this when we all part. But I'm using the bells and I'm going to start ringing the bells. Now, the bells are there for protection for us all. The red wool around the Ram is there for protection. And the wood itself, which comes from the linden tree, is also very protective. And it's also all about stories. It's all about telling the truth. It's all about what we're talking about today. So this little stick, if you like, that I'm using here is quite effective in the sense that it's bringing us closer to ourselves. And that is what I would like to wish for in this closing meditation. If we can ask our ancestors to come closer to us, and I know that my own ancestor always comes close when I ring these bells. But if we can ask our ancestors, and I know that some of you have the ancestors with you because I've worked with some of you, and the ones I haven't worked with, I know your ancestors are there too. We all have ancestors. It's impossible not to have them. So let's ask our ancestors to come close to us and to help us to speak that common wild tongue, to help us to reunite with what we have inside, to get closer to something, to really move forward. And let's ask Ravnos, the sky spirit, to help us. Now he's all about our minds. Let's ask Can, he's the sun spirit. He will give us courage. And let's ask Shon, the moon spirit. She will give us the intuition and the instinct and the guts we need to move forward. And let's ask Puff, the earth spirit, to help us to be disciplined enough to move forward and to know when we're on the right path and when we're taking a bit of a dodgy path. Let's ask these four greater ancestors, earth, sky, sun, moon, to come and help us. Now they speak the wild tongue because they never lost it. It's only humans who did. So our ancestors are connected to the greater ancestors, air, earth, sky, moon, and that's air, earth, fire, and water as well. We know the four directions and we know the four elements, if you like. So let's call upon them. And moreover, let's contact what we in the Romani culture call our Z. Now that's the part of you that's in the center. That's the part of you that will contain everything that you need to know, everything that you need to become. That's the part that delivers you to the spirit of destiny. And that is the part that we need to polish up, if you like. We need to connect with that part because that part is the true part. That part is the part that will not mess us about. And if we're talking about the spirit of destiny again, we need to understand that there is an original road that we can follow, an original path that is part of organic thinking. If we can follow this path, if we can connect with this destiny road, then we won't have to go on an alternative road and mess about trying to find our way home. And even if we do mess about, we've got to trust that we can find our way back again. So ask your ancestors now at this time. Ask the greater ancestors of sky, earth, sun and moon, all of them to come together and to speak to us here now in the West, those of us who are tired of not belonging, those of us who want to belong to what we have within ourselves, what we can find, what we can contribute to each other with everything that we've got and with everything we can share. And if we can do this, then we have made an amazing achievement, a wonderful step forward. Have hope, have heart, see that we can move forward, and we will. We will do that. So I'd like to thank the bells for protecting everyone, even though we're all miles away from each other. The bells enter the other world and enter the room, the place where you're sitting, and caress your spirit. And I'd like to thank everyone who's made a contribution to what we've been talking about here. There will be wonderful realizations coming to us, and we want to encourage those. So thank you to the spirits, thank you to the ancestors, and thank you mostly to the common wild tongue that is waiting to speak to us and to sing to us. Who knows, in the very next few days. Padakaravatut kushtimuli, padakaravatut, padakaravatut. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jasper. Thank you for coming with us tonight. Thank you for being on Zoom for the first time. Very professionally done. We're hoping to have Jasper with us more often, and we have a little something planned for the next few months. So keep an eye on our website for that. And thank you to everybody for coming tonight. It's absolutely wonderful to see you. Yes, and may the common wild tongue speak with you over the next few days. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jasper. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.